Hi everyone. Today we're going to look at sequences by third. We're going to look at the descending third sequence, and we're going to start by looking at a piece of music called the Canon in D by the composer Johann Pachelbel. Now this piece is frequently just known as Pachelbel's Canon. It's by far the thing that Pachelbel is the most famous for. You've surely heard it a million times before, but let's go ahead and take a moment to listen to it right now. You may remember from what you already know about sequences that a sequence tends to be put together with a model and then a series of copies, ideally two or more copies of that model. The model will frequently be two chords. In this case, that's what we're dealing with. So this piece, as the title tells us, is in D major, making this the tonic chord, the one chord. I've got sort of an idealized version here of the chord progression, but it's very close to what Pachelbel has written. So our model is going to be two chords, and that starts by going 1 to 5. Then we're going from 5, we're going up to 6. We've got a D major chord, an A major chord, then we're going to a B minor chord. That's going to be 6. And then in much the same way as our model goes, we've got something that goes down by a 4th to a 3 chord. So we can start to say that this is our model. And this is what a copy looks like. And as the name of the sequence that I mentioned at the beginning of the video implies, this is a sequence in which the music goes down by third with each successive copy. So you've got the 1 chord goes down by a third from D to B, 1 to 6. Then with each successive copy, we're leaping down, we're sort of overshooting where we're going. So we go down by a 4th, up by a step, which adds up to a third. Down by a 4th, up by a step here to the 4 chord, which is G major. And then if you were to go down by a 4th from the 4 chord, you end up back on 1. So that's sort of the interesting thing about this sequence, is that you're descending by thirds overall between the models and the copies, or among the copies. But if you go out for just a couple of copies, you're going to wind up back on 1. So what usually will happen in one of these descending third sequences is that at some point the progression will turn around. We've seen sequences like the circle of fifth sequence or the descending second sequence. We've seen sequences that cycle all the way around and they wind up having some 2-5-1 function at the end. This one doesn't tend to work like that. This one tends to only go a little while, and it would be very rare to continue this all the way to a full, third copy or 4th iteration. It would be rare to go from the 1 up to the 2 chord here. It can happen. We'll see a gesture towards that in our other example. But more common is for this sequence to wind up back to tonic and then to sort of turn around and finish with a cadence. So in this case, we go back to 4, we go back up to 5. So the G, A, and then that can land back on 1. So we're sort of turning around, breaking out of the expected copy and finishing this off with predominant to dominant and then letting it continue. You may notice the resemblance if you think back to our pop music unit. For example, we talked about the Pachelbel progression in classical music and pop music. That's exactly this. And I didn't really mention at the time, but it turns out that this is a sequence, which was our very next unit. So this is a sequence that descends in thirds, like I said. One of the things you'll sometimes find as a variation is that when you find this as a sort of less sequential idea. When you find something that breaks out of here, you might find 1/6 being used here. That gives you the same bass note, but it sort of breaks out of the sequential pattern. It'll let 1/6 go up to 4. So the effect is very, very similar. The chords are very close to each other, but sometimes you'll hear it as a true sequence. Sometimes you'll hear it, particularly in pop contexts, going 1, 5, 6, 1, 6, and then going up from there. So that's one form of the descending thirds sequence. I showed you this version in root position, partly because the Pachelbel example is so famous, and partly because it's always easy to learn things that are in root position, but actually this sequence tends to happen more often using an alternation of root position and 6/3 chords, 5/3 and 6/3. Root position, first inversion. They tend to alternate. That's actually the more common version of this sequence. And I just want to show you as a schematic here before we look at another musical example that the result of putting these notes or these chords in the first inversion is that you wind up with a stepwise bass line. You wind up with D here. Move my camera a bit. You have D, and instead of going down to A, you go down to C sharp. So you've got your 1 chord, 5, 6, then we get B, we have our 6 chord, three, 6 here with A in the bass, 4 chord there, and here we wind up on that 1/6 that pop songs like to so frequently skip ahead to. If you want to give it your full model copy, your 1/6 will be delayed here in your stepwise version. Then frequently this will turn around in the very same way, going to 4 or maybe 2/6 to 5. So that stepwise version, like I said, is probably more common because of the descending bass line. It's such a strong feature and such a popular feature. It happens all the time. This is especially the one that you hear in pop songs. You'll remember we talked about how Les Miserables is structured around this progression, Piano Man, tons and tons of other examples. Let's look at a piece of music now that will actually give us this progression written out in the stepwise format, alternating the 5/3 and the 6/3 chords. This is a song by Fanny Hensel, the German composer. It's called Neue Liebe, Neues Leben. That's new love, new life. Let's take a moment to listen to it.
Herz, mein Herz, was soll das geben? Was bedrängt dich so sehr? Welch ein fremdes, neues Leben, ich erkenne dich nicht mehr.
So you may recognize that this is an antecedent consequent period. You've got 4 measures up here. You have a little pickup note, and then 1, 2, 3. Halfway through the 4th measure, we wind up on a half cadence. Then we start over here, and we're going to wind up on a PAC. So this, along with illustrating the stepwise progression, this also kind of shows us how one of these sequential progressions can play into a structure that we recognize, the antecedent consequent period. So let's start to do a little bit of analysis here. What we're going to find is that our model is 1 measure long, although it starts on this beat 3 pickup, so that our model is going to go like this. And then our copies will begin at this rate. So we sort of have a model here that starts on 1, then it's going to go to 5, 6, downwards. Our first copy starts on 6. It's going to go to the 3 chord, which is the same harmonic distance, except it's going to be in the first inversion. So that we have 1, 5, 6, 6, 3, 6. Our next copy is going to be 4 to 1, 6. So you see this model. Herz, mein Herz, was. There's your model. It goes down a step from where it was, but that's the distance of a third in both the melody and the bass. So Herz, mein Herz, was soll das geben, was bedränget? Then something interesting happens. Like I said, this progression kind of has to turn around in some way. It will rarely continue all the way down through to the 2 chord that you would expect if you're going 1 down to 6, down to 4, next would be 2. And that will rarely be realized. But in certain ways, this example is kind of cool because it gestures towards that. You'll notice that both the bass line here and the vocal line jump up very noticeably, sort of dramatically, to end the phrase. They jump up so that they can sort of give us some energy going into the cadence, and I think also for range considerations so that the voice doesn't go too low. But if you were to continue these patterns an octave down, they actually sort of give you the note that you would expect. You know, at each sequential tier here, we're continuing down from 5, 6 to down to 6 to the beginning of the first copy is just down a step, down a step, down a step to the next copy, D. C is where we would be on the next copy. Same with E flat here. Each copy you're going down a step to complete that third motion, and you actually would expect to go F down to E flat here if we were going to complete or continue the sequence as it was going in descending thirds. But we get that written a little bit differently. Instead of getting a 2 chord that would put C in the bass and E flat, those notes, C and E flat, are sort of recontextualized. We get the A here, and then we finally get just a little reference here to an F, which is the 5 chord. So I would say that this is a 5, 4, 3 here instead of 2. Those notes you expect, C in the bass, E flat in the voice, those notes are given a different harmonic context. So we land on the expected notes, but they are not harmonized the way we thought they might be. And this kind of sets us up to close the progression. They leap upwards for range considerations, I think, but then they continue down, and here is your 1 chord again. And the very same D on which the song started, it's going to be a little bit different here, and that's going to set us up to go, 5, 4, 3, 1, 2, 5, sort of decorated as a cadential 6, 4 here with D resolving down to C, D to C, B flat to A there. It gives us this little cadence here, a half cadence that is set up. So we have do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, and then if you continue down, that would be re, do, so. And then the same thing up in thirds above. Do, so, mi, re, do, ti, la, so, fa, mi, re. There for the cadential 6/4. Then, since this is an antecedent consequent period, there's the division, and we start all over. We get another model, just like we had. More copies, except that we're going to break out of the copy a little bit sooner. So here's your 1, your 5, 6, down to 6, 3, 6, 4, everything here just as it had been. Here we're going to make our leap sooner up to the 1, 6. We're going to leave our bass line upwards there. The vocal line is about to deviate from where it's been here. And we're going to go down to slight variation here. We're going to wind up here will be kind of our little decorated 5-6-4 to 5-3, and then you'll have a little anticipation there. 6-4, B flat goes to A in both the voice and the piano here. We've actually, I would say we have our 7th up here as well, because the E flat is going to sort of go down to D there. So we've got 5-6-4, the 7th is already there. We're going to go down very momentarily to the 5-3, and then we get an anticipation here, where it's fa, re, do, ti, do, do. And that 5-6-4 resolves down to 5-3, and then it goes to 1. So you see a pretty typical idea here where the cadence gets changed around a little bit. It doesn't quite push the functions forward like you might often find, but it does go straight to the cadence here instead of letting that connect down to the tonic and then set the cadence up on the downbeat with the 5 chord. You kind of get the 5 chord. The 5 chord comes at the same place, but it comes in a different position, and it plays a different role here, which is another nice illustration of a really clever little detail with the notes, with the pattern, how it's expected and how it ends up playing out, that Fanny Hensel is able to do a lot of really elegant things by just changing a note around here or a note around there. I realize also I left out a chord. She changes this one just a little bit too. We get C in the bass here, E flat very prominently as you had, A and C, but no F, not even a little 8th note sort of de-emphasized like we had before. So actually I would say that this one here is where we break out of our sequential pattern, because this is a 7 chord in the first inversion, and that's, a kind of weaker dominant that here is passing up there. So, I should actually show not that it's bracketed like this, but actually that here is where our sequential pattern starts to break apart. So that's the descending third sequence, how it plays out in 2 different pieces of music, with first the root position, sort of Pachelbel bass line, and then here in the Fanny Hensel song, a really nice example of how what we call the descending 5-6 version of this works. It's a sequence that descends in thirds by alternating 5-3 chords with 6-3 chords. And it also kind of gives you an illustration of how you can treat the ending of this sequence in different ways. As I said, the sequence, although it wraps itself back around to tonic, it's going to leave you hanging there, and it's going to leave you with more to do. So you end up doing either what Pachelbel does, where you turn right back around and go up to 4 and then 5, or you do what Fanny Hensel does, where she passes downwards through a 5 chord to the tonic to the half cadence, or she sort of turns it around here, reharmonizes this, and goes to so, do to set up the PAC that finishes off the period.